Started. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, brothers of Alpha Phi Alpha. Good evening, friends from near and far. Distinguished brothers of Epsilon Gamma Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, welcome you to Walls, Bridges, and Boundaries, a discussion on Black men's mental health. I'm Brother Jerron Green, and I'll be your moderator for this evening. Right now, we want to hear a word of welcome from our chapter president, none other than Brother Franz Pamphile.
Thank you, Brother Jerron Green. This is Brother Franz Pamphile, President of Epsilon Gamma Lambda Chapter. I wanted to just send this welcome to everyone who's going to listen to this discussion. We have three great professionals and a wonderful moderator, Brother Jerron Green. This discussion is basically something I felt that was needed, especially before the election, with what's going on with the pandemic, what's going on with social justice, and how we feel as Black men dealing with our mental illness or mental health, I should say. And so I think that it's in a very important conversations because we don't have it enough. And so these distinguished gentlemen will lead us in that discussion. So just want to give you a welcome, and I'll turn it back to you, Brother Green.
Thank you, Brother President. Again, we welcome you to the discussion tonight entitled Walls, Bridges, and Boundaries, a discussion on Black men's mental health. My name is Brother Jerron Green, and I am the senior pastor of Union Baptist Church of Cambridge. I'm also a mental health counselor for high school students in Boston. And tonight I will serve as your moderator for this evening's discussion with our dynamic panel of Boston Alphas in medicine, mental, and behavioral health. Now, for housekeeping purposes, please remain on mute for the duration of tonight's discussion, but feel free to utilize the chat section to comment and interact. I'll let a couple more people in as we continue the conversation. This year, the coronavirus, COVID-19 pandemic has profoundly affected life around the globe. Isolation, contact restrictions, economic shutdown have all imposed a complete life change to the psychosocial environment in each and every country affected. These challenges have significantly affected and threatened the mental health of children, adolescents, and adults in our community. Anxiety, lack of peer contact, and reduced opportunities for stress regulation are of major concern to those who work in mental and behavioral health. Yet and still, the current crisis has brought with it opportunities for personal growth and for family cohesion. But it's difficult to think about family cohesion when you're faced with loss after loss after loss, or when a grandparent isn't able to visit their precious grandchildren or hug their loved ones in a warm embrace. However, this pandemic, it only exacerbates the often difficult reality of being a Black man in America. Recently, I saw a post on social media that said these words: as a Black man, I am mentally exhausted. As a Black man and a medical student, I'm mentally drained. As a Black son, I'm mentally fatigued from reassuring my mom that I'm still alive. Brother W.E.B. Du Bois posed this question in his 1903 book, The Soul of Black Folks. It's still quite relevant today for the Black men who are even gathered on this call. How does it feel to be a problem? The historical dehumanization, oppression, and violence against Black men, Black people, African Americans, it's evolved into this present day racism. It's structural, it's institutional, it's individual, and it cultivates this unique, mistrustful, and less affluent community experience for Black men. It's characterized by disparities, including inadequate access to and delivery of care in healthcare. To discuss these topics and others along with it, I want to introduce you to a dynamic panel. These are my brothers. First, brother Dr. Terrell Johnson. Dr. Terrell Y. Johnson is an attending physician instructor of medicine at Boston University School of Medicine and at Boston Medical Center. As an internist, his focus is on primary care and preventative medicine in keeping populations healthy. Dr. Johnson attended Boston University, where he received his medical degree, completing his residency in internal medicine at St. Elizabeth's Medical Center. Dr. Johnson is a native of the Chicagoland area, the Midwest, and he is a graduate of Tougaloo College, a prestigious HBCU there in Tougaloo, Mississippi, where he was initiated through the Gamma Upsilon chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated in 2001. Joining Dr. Johnson is brother S. Kwame Dance. Kwame is a fifth-year clinical psychology doctoral candidate at William James College, completing his American Psychological Association accredited pre-doctoral internship at the Center for Multicultural Training in Psychology at Boston University School of Psychiatry. In 2019, he founded the Mental Health Advancement of Culturally Competent Education to Stop Stigma, otherwise known as ACCESS, the ACCESS program, a mental health education and career pipeline paid internship for Black teens that aim to increase interest in pursuing mental health professions. He is also a behavioral health clinician at the Whittier Street Health Center. Kwame was initiated into Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated on March 4th, 2004 through the Kappa Delta chapter, which covered the University of Connecticut, Trinity College, where he attended, University of Hartford, Eastern and Central Connecticut State Universities. Rounding out our panel is none other than brother Walter Higgs III. Walter is a year 2000 graduate of North Carolina Central University, where he earned a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics with a minor in business. In 2005, he obtained a triple master's degree, the Master of Divinity and the Master of Arts in Church Music from the Morehouse School of Religion at the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta, and a Master of Public Health from Morehouse School of Medicine, part of the Joint Master's Program within the graduate schools of the Atlanta University Center, the AUC. On February 18th, 2007, he became an ordained clergy member at the Union Institutional Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia. In 2015, he obtained yet another master's degree, the Master of Social Work at Simmons College, with a specialization in urban leadership and clinical social work. Walter is a licensed clinical social worker and currently serves as a clinical supervisor for the Elliott Community Human Services Center in Saugus, Massachusetts, where he renders intensive clinical intervention and therapeutic services for the city's chronically and mentally ill population. Walter is a 2009 initiate of the Epsilon Gamma Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Brothers, I say welcome to each of you, and let's get to it.
Thank you, Brother Jerron.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You are quite welcome. So, overall, mental health conditions occur in Black America and in Black Americans at about the same or even less frequency than white Americans. However, the historical Black and African American experience has continued to be characterized by trauma and violence, more often, some would say, than our white counterparts. Racism is a public health and mental health crisis. So here's the first question for all of you panelists today. How can we begin to better understand the impacts on the emotional and mental health of both youth and young adult Black men?
Well, I guess I'll jump in first. First off, thanks everybody for coming out today because we are doing exactly that today. The first step, I believe, is to talk about it. To We have been doing a much better job, I feel, as a community, as Black men, uh, talking about mental health, just because of the advocates, the celebrities that are stepping out. I know folks like Charlemagne the God talks about mental health and his battle with anxiety often, and that's getting a new generation, a new wave of folks talking about what they're going through. We're in the process of trying to normalize the experience, but we still have a long way to go with that. Um, Normalizing treatment, I think that's part of that process. So I think the very first step, I guess we'll kick it off, is just talking and having more conversations like these. We'll get deeper.
So again, Brother Green, I want to say thank you for having me. This is Brother Johnson. I would agree 100%. The first part of accepting and understanding the problem is to acknowledge a problem. And until we can have more people acknowledge things, and not just celebrities, not just athletes, but mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters. And as long as we can sit down and have these conversations, recognizing that there is no quick solution, there is no quick answer. Because that you say you feel nervous today, or because you say I feel strained or I feel depressed today, that doesn't mean tomorrow is going to be a great day, but it means that you're on the path to figuring out how to deal with it. And that is the first and most important step.
I think I want to add to what my brothers have said. I think in the African American diaspora, what I have noticed in my practice is this stigma as it relates when we talk about mental health. And, it's very disheartening because the stigma seem to perceive, and especially amongst, I have found amongst Black men or men of color, is somehow this notion that mental health means weakness. And who wants to be considered weak? I don't want to be vulnerable. I don't want to be considered, I can be easily taken advantage of. And there seemed to be like this stigma. And so I think in addition to acknowledging that there are mental health issues that are going on within the self, I think we also need to also address the stigmas, the stigmas that seem to be constantly attached to this thing called mental health, especially in our communities. It has caused many, many people to not receive the services that they need. And more importantly, there have been people who have, like, for all intents and purposes, died because they just do not treat themselves. They do not seek the treatment that is necessary to keep themselves stable and healthy.
And just to add on, you, brother, well, we've all talked about stigma, and I think it's important to recognize that stigma in the Black community didn't come, from nowhere. It's very much so a learned behavior based on being misunderstood, mistrust that's formed from things like the Tuskegee study and other just medical, you know, malpractice against us specifically, and that isn't unique to to medical professions. It's equally, in fact, more so present in our mental health history. So I think that stigma came from a reason, and it's time for us to begin to break that down. The other piece that you spoke of is Brother Green. You talked about mental health during these times of racism, and racism being a mental illness. And it just reminded me of a book that I just came across. It's been out for a little bit, but The Protest Psychosis, and the subtitle is How Schizophrenia Became a Black Disease, and it's by Dr. Jonathan Metzy. And just the evolution of the idea of psychosis and schizophrenia. Um, he breaks down the history, and initially it was a term used for a white genius. Schizophrenia was like, oh, that's a quirky white guy, but he's a genius, like Einstein. And then as the civil rights movement and other Black initiatives came to be, our anger as Black men especially started to be misperceived as a mental illness, and that's how that came to be, that stigma in our community.
Very good. Thank you, Brother Dance. There's this notion of stigma and seeking help, as if seeking help is a problem. For many Black folks, help-seeking behavior is affected by mistrust of the medical system. Someone in the comment section mentioned Henrietta Lacks, who today still has affected medicine. I'm sure Dr. Johnson can talk for hours about that. But there's this mistrust of the medical system, and it often begins, this help-seeking behavior, with the church, with faith-based outreach. Like, well, I don't need to go and talk to a counselor. I don't need to go and see a doctor because I can pray this thing away. And while I am a minister, and I do believe that you can pray, and you should pray every day, I also believe that God gives wisdom. So my question to you all, the panel, is how do we begin to understand diagnoses? And another question is, what's wrong with labels? Can we just name it and claim it?
So, Brother Green, I will take the first shot at this one. As a primary care physician, I often am the first point of contact for people to the medical system. And so many times patients will come to me, and it is clear that they have something that they want to get across, but they're afraid to get across, and they will say something along the lines of, I know this sounds crazy, but, or, somebody was telling me I had this, but, or they would say something like along the lines of, I've really been thinking about this, and I think I have some kind of problem, and they're afraid to discuss. They think that there will be cast some judgment upon them. They think that we are assuming that there is a want of something, when really our goal in the medical profession is to help individuals. Returning to the theme that we mentioned earlier about stigma, I have several patients, and one of the things I'm blessed about in my field is that I can see patients over generations. So I can see the children, the parents, the grandparents. And many times I will hear patients say, I really think I'm depressed, but don't tell my parents or don't tell my grandparents. And they have that concern, that weakness that Brother Higgs spoke about. The first step is to getting people to not be afraid of the medical system, which is hard for several different reasons. But the overarching thing is that support can be there for you, but no one knows unless you speak up and ask. Presenting to a primary care physician is a much better choice to do on your own, as opposed to ending up in an emergency room somewhere where something is forced upon you.
And I think I want to add to what Dr. Brother Johnson just elaborated on, because as a mental health professional, some of the same lines. I think what I have encountered and seen amongst my clientele is them constantly saying and hearing from them is like the overarching images that they have grown to know what mental health is associated with. And so if someone says, oh, I have a schizophrenia diagnosis or I'm bipolar, unfortunately, our media have really paint this picture of what these mental health illnesses look like. And because it's so not the contrary to what they ascribe to or who they have come to be individually, they tend not to say anything or will be less prone to even say anything about their diagnosis to get the help and the services that they need, because again, they don't want to be categorized or they don't want to be associated with these images that they have gone to see and know. And what I want to say as a caveat, I don't see that too much from the population of like from 18 to like maybe 30-year-olds, as much as I see a lot of this with the age demographic that I work with that is above maybe 40 years old and up, is what I have noticed. And I think that the reason why, the age group of 18 to 30 that I've experienced do not see it as such, and they'll be more apt to like embrace the services, is because, again, there's been a lot of reframing. There's common language now to talk about mental health, whereas generations that are before them, there have been so much stigmas, there have been so many taboos, there have been lots of thoughts about, okay, and they've seen and experienced this notion of going to, I'm from North Carolina, and we had these institutions called Bryn Mawr Hospital or Dorothea Dix Hospital that like kept people away from the public because, they had these mental health issues. And so, that's some of the things that I have encountered with this whole notion that it looks a certain way. This particular diagnosis look a certain way, and therefore I'm not going to disclose that because I don't want to be looked upon in a certain way.
Yeah, it's unfortunately certain mental illnesses carry more stigma than others. And Brother Higgs mentioned bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. And when I spoke earlier about a lot of celebrities normalizing conversations about mental health, anxiety and depression are the two go-tos in that. And unfortunately, it's still taboo to talk about other mental illnesses, and which a lot of people suffer from, and how that looks. And I'm sure Dr. Brother Johnson has seen this quite a bit. But folks might leave out symptoms because they're embarrassing. It's easy to talk about the depressive side of bipolar disorder, but it's a little harder. One, it's harder to recognize the manic side because often it feels good, but it's tough to talk about those symptoms, even if they're there. And the dark secret is even a lot of mental health professionals and healthcare professionals still carries their own stigma about certain mental illnesses. So, but we're aiming to change that as a field. The other thing is, Black patients, there's several studies that say Black patients feel far less comfortable talking to white providers. And we don't have very many Black providers. In fact, some, for psychology, I think it's that most recent stat I saw was for psychology, practicing psychologists, it's 4% of the workforce, which is, you're far less likely to see a Black psychologist if you're a Black patient. So if you're uncomfortable working with somebody, you're going to be uncomfortable reporting all your symptoms. And the other piece you asked about was diagnoses and are they important? I think diagnoses can be freeing to a lot of people. I think there is a purpose to them. When you've gone your whole life not knowing what was wrong with you, being able to put a name to that and understand that there's an evidence-based treatment associated with that, or medication associated with that, that can make you feel better, can be liberating. And they're not perfect. They're a symptom cluster that keeps evolving. So I think there's pros and cons.
I just want to also add to the statistics within the number of Black people and people of color occupying these fields. As a social worker, those numbers are extremely low. And especially when you start talking about Black men within the field of social work, that number is less than 1%. And so I mean, it's just very, very startling a lot of times, the reactions when I announce myself or introduce myself as a clinical social worker, and I have people like looking at me like, because again, traditionally they associate social work with white women, and it's just the makeup and the imagery of what the field has been. But yeah, like I have experienced those same things that Brother Dance has so talked about just a few minutes ago.
Thank you, brothers. I want to give you a question, pose a question to you that I received. Um, and it's just like this. It says, I'm a private person. I don't like to talk to anyone about my personal business. Talking about my emotions is usually out of the question. If I take a chance and go to a counselor, where do I even begin? Do I start with my immediate needs, or do I attempt to go deep with stuff that I've been holding on to?
I think that's a great question. My automatic go-to is to say, deal with your needs first. I think when you start, and most times in my experience, usually people come to my services because there's an immediate need. Um, I'm always thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You know, the baseline is the first, like basic essentials like food and clothes and shelter. Like those things are important, and most of the time in my field, those are the immediate things. And when we start addressing the immediate needs, that's when we start developing what I like to call a therapeutic relationship, and then from there, that's when people have started like beginning to like open up to me about these little things, these other things that got them to the place where they need these immediate needs. And so, you know, that helps me developing those relationships because I'm identifying an immediate need on the spot, for me has led to people opening up to the deeper and private stuff because you've established a trust. And that's what I definitely know amongst people of color and especially Black men, that I have served and I've treated. Like, trust is everything. And if you don't have that trust, and if you don't establish that trust, and if they even if they remotely feel that you cannot be trusted, they will still shut you out. They'll get their needs met, but they will not open up. But when you start establishing that trust, that's when I begin to see that people like start opening up. So dealing with the needs first, and then because that will again allow you to establish the trust, and then they'll start opening up.
Yeah, that therapeutic alliance is key, and what I tell folks who are seeking treatment and uh, to whom I give referrals, I tell them that therapy is like your relationship with your therapist is like any other relationship. I try to encourage folks to give it a chance, and hopefully not just one chance, but if that person is so off-putting that you know it's not going to be a good fit, don't stick around. There are other people, there are different styles. Brother Higgs, you mentioned Maslow's, and when I heard hierarchy of needs, and when I first heard the question, that's where I went. And you know, our first goal as clinicians is to stabilize and make sure that those that the person is safe. So I absolutely agree with that piece. My first question to my clients is what brought you here today, and see where they take that. Some might take it like I've had these traumatic memories of something that happened with you know, from childhood, and some might just be like, you know, I just been feeling down and I don't know why, and start getting into their current symptoms, and we address that. And there's different approaches that and you could ask several different clinicians and they'll answer that different ways based on their modality and their approach. So
Just the one last thing that I would like to add is that these are typically feelings and emotions that build up over a period of time, be it weeks, the months, the years. And oftentimes when people go to see a provider, and particularly a new provider, you can forget, or there's just so much going on in your mind that you forget. I really always encourage patients to write things down, write down the things you want to talk about, bring a list to your provider. You can even hand the provider the list if you want to, so that we know what things that you do want to accomplish, because there can be some amount of shell shock, and you want to be as efficient and as productive as you can anytime you get a chance to meet with a provider.
So there are disparities in access to care. Speaking of meeting with providers, to care and to treatment for Black and African American people who have, it's persisted over time. I'm wondering, are these same gaps present in mental health? Are there gaps that apply to mental health? Um, and are there access and insurance? What are the barriers or the blockages that stop Black men from accessing providers?
Ooh, wow. That's such a loaded question and a loaded gun because, you know, this is what I do on a day-to-day basis, and that is helping navigate people. The culprit is called the system. We have a very broken system that we are trying to, for a better lack of better words, we trying to get a better product out of something that you know that just really really doesn't work, and it has been proven over the intersections of time that it just does not work. We're expected to play by these systems, and by the way, you know, racism is definitely systemic, as Brother Green has so mentioned. Like, and if we have to always keep that in mind as well. And especially when I'm dealing with my Black and my people of color, the barriers have always been just being able to have access. And when I mean access to the information. Like, you'll be surprised of the things that people are not aware of. And then when it's brought to their light, well, all you had to do is, you know, well, I know about this particular resource, or I know about this particular resource. And then the common response that I'm always getting is like, no one told me about this. And I've wasted all these years and I wasted all this time because I could have had X, I could have had Y. That is true for housing. You know, that's also about housing resources, meaning like, hey, I'm behind on my rent and I don't know how to, you know, access the resources just to be able to make, you know, the rent for the month so that I won't get kicked out and my kids won't get kicked out. And if you don't have access and the knowledge to where the resources are, it's going to always be a barrier. You're going to always be in this particular state where, you know, you're at prey of like getting the you know, the short end of the stick. And I mean, I also want to make mention of the fact of this thing called the legal system. And that is something that I have found in the middle of all of this. Like, even if you have things like a SORI or a CORI background, that has prevented people from getting access to certain sources, resources, and services. And you cannot begin to understand how much I've had to go on attorney mode a lot of these times with these potential providers and these potential agencies and all, just so that people can have these resources to just live the basic common, just to have the basic quality life that everybody deserves, just at baseline. These are factors that are impeding a lot of our Black and brown people from being able to get the things that they need just to live the quality of life that they deserve to live. I can go on and on about it, and I'm gonna let my other brothers talk. So
It's interesting that you mentioned the legal system, because oftentimes uh, mental health professionals, medical professionals have to act as advocate for the folks who come to see us. Um, so we've got a lot of questions that are coming in the chat, and I love that. Please feel free to put your questions in the comment section, and we'll do our best to meet all of these questions. I'm going to throw this one in here for our dynamic and very capable panel. Uh, Here it is. Racism, homonegativity, and the experiences of violence and discrimination contribute significantly to mental disorder, burden, and morbidity in the Black gay community. If discrimination in any form is stressful and can be a risk factor for developing symptoms of depression and anxiety, how do we better equip Black men in the LGBTQ plus community to protect their mental health?
Well, when we talk about disparity, you know, I think disparity in trauma and stress and all of these factors hit any. I hate to use the word minority, but I'll use it in this case. But gender minorities, racial and ethnic minority, or you know, whatever you have it, we get hit pretty hard. And when you have any kind of intersectionality between the two, or between multiple of those minority groups or those oppressed groups, it's going to increase the stress. And again, the last question was about access. It's much more difficult to find services to meet your needs. If we're it's tough in this society today. All of us feel a little out of control, and I know we're going to get in the political piece a little bit later, but that's the meat of anxiety, stress, and is control, and feeling that people don't have your back, that you're not secure. Brother Higgs was talking about Maslow's hierarchy. You don't feel safe. So if we don't feel safe, that that leads to our stress response, our fight, flight, or freeze response. And when those responses become activated, they can lead to, they're necessary for survival. So we need to have our fight, flight, or freeze responses. But when they become uncontrollable, they can often lead to mental illness, to something that's pathological. So it's a lot of pieces, but I think the root is in safety and control, and not feeling those. So we need to regain that and support our LGBTQ Black community, and be kind to one another, and to respect one another despite our backgrounds.
Is counseling a safe space? You know, me and my wife often have this conversation that the Black church is much more than just church. I have many people that come to my church that would probably say they're not believers at all. They're there because it's a safe place to express their culture, to receive motivational messages. Is counseling a safe space like that?
So although I'm not a counselor, I want to speak up to that. Yes, counseling is a very safe space, and it is meant to be that. There is something called caretaker fatigue, which means that if you always bring your problems to that partner that you have, whether it be a male or a female, mother, father, brother, sister, that can cause an undue burden on them. And trained counselors are a safe space to really express what is going on inside of you, so that it can be helped to be diagnosed. One other thing that I really want to add to when we talk about access, though, I often equate access to language, and having a language that you understand, or a language that two people feel is safe and can talk about. That is where the Black church comes in so handy. When you go to church, there's a comfort in the language of the words that are being said, the rhythm and the flow. And it is the same thing when you find a therapist who works for you. So that language is access as well too. But yes, it is a safe space, and you should look at it as a safe space where the person does not judge you, and the person does not feel downtrodden by what you are saying, and you are not attacking them in any kind of way. So therapy is a very safe space.
I personally, the question that Brother Green just raised about the LGBTQ, the Black LGBTQ population. I don't know if whether or not, I want to know if whether or not that question had been answered to the person who asked it. Because I definitely am living an experience right now where I am serving um, three three clients right now who are right now going through the whole process of going through a gender affirmation surgery right now, and they're preparing for that. And in itself is very, very traumatic because again, you know, and especially considering the fact that we loop the church in that, because a lot of their family members, again, like very strong and religious and spiritual people who have a lot of ideologies that is thrown at them, and yet at the same time there's this.
I think we may have lost you. Make sure your microphone is not muted, my friend.
We lost him, bro.
All right, but we'll come back. We'll come back because I know you have more to say on that topic. Um, let's just jump here, my brothers. So processing and dealing with layers. That's what I'm hearing through this conversation. You mentioned intersectionality, brother Dance. I call it layers of individual trauma on top of trauma. The traumas even of COVID-19. There's this uncertainty, there's isolation, there's grief, there's financial burden, there's human loss. Now there's police brutality, and then it's made into this fetish for the news media, and then there's divisive political rhetoric. It's compounding layers of complexity for Black men. Who's responsible for this? Here's my question: what if Trump is reelected? What if Biden is elected but the cleanup takes longer than expected? What then, my brothers, is the condition of the Black men's mental health expected to be? Are we to be patient? How are we going to deal with life if we don't get our way? What do we do after November 3rd?
Brother Green, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay, I was experiencing some technical difficulties on this end. I don't know what happened.
That's
Uh,
okay. So finish up your comments and then tie in the answer to this one too.
yeah, so again, like there's this intersection or this thing with regards to living like your truth, but also this notion that my family members or my support system don't ascribe to my truth and don't want me to because of their ideologies and their spiritual beliefs and all of that. And then there comes this particular tension. And so a lot of times I found, and what I have seen is a lot of them, like for the sake of wanting to make sure that they're living in their truth, for the sake of their self-care and their mental well-being and mental stability, find themselves creating other communities that they call family, who ascribe and affirm and are allies. And they find themselves like connecting with them in those support groups. And to ask the question, to answer the question about what happens after November 3rd, if things do or do not swing our way, I think now more than ever, it is very critical and it is paramount that we create environments and we create safe places and spaces amongst ourselves to say, hey, it is okay to vent. It is okay to express your feelings and thoughts or whatever and get it out there so that at the end of the day, we can sit down and strategize how are we going to, where do we go from here? What steps do we need to go from here? But also understanding and know that you have supports. You are supported, you're supported and you have supports. That's the thing. And my grandmother always said, closed mouths don't get fed. So if you have not because you ask not. And so if you don't take it upon yourself to empower yourself to ask for the help, you won't be helped.
Mm. So in Philadelphia, one of our participants tonight asked this question, there was another tragedy that happened, experienced yet another tragedy of a Black man, a young Black man who had a long history of mental illness. The question is, what should have or could have been done to get him more help? And what do we need to do to train our police department? Um, there was a mother who was crying out specifically, warning them, he has mental health issues. Please don't kill my Black man, my son. What could have been done? What should have been done? Do you guys have any input about police reform and how it connects with mental and behavioral health? Who wants to jump in first?
Brother Higgs, okay. So, yeah, this is an interesting one, but I will say that I work very closely with consulting. I'm from Cambridge, Mass. I try to work with some of the police that work with my young people and how to approach them and in times of stress and duress. And I will say that there are some police forces that are doing it better than others. And sometimes it can be hard for, well, it's not that hard, but sometimes they frankly don't listen to the experts because we're not living in their shoes and they have an extremely tough job. So I don't want to make it seem like it's an easy thing to do when somebody's being aggressive and you're thinking about what they might have on them and all that stuff. I can kind of sort of understand that experience of feeling like you need to do something, especially when you don't understand. I think psychoeducation needs to happen on all police forces, the learning about what mental illness is, what it looks like. And you would think that that happened, but in consulting with Cambridge police and others, I've found that that isn't always the case. Cambridge does a pretty good job, so I always big them up, and I hope that some folks will model after them. I'm not personally a proponent of getting rid of police completely. I think they have a purpose. I do think that training and the people they bring in, they need to think about who they're bringing in so they can people that understand the populations they're working with.
I really battle with this particular question. And the reason why is because I have seen in my experience in doing this work how the police and how the law in itself handle a white person and how they handle a Black person, and especially with regards to affairs of mental health. And outcomes, just like we've seen in Philadelphia, is the end result, or they're incarcerated, because there has been noted history that this Black person has these string of mental health, issues that's been going on. And I know for me, I'm a strong advocate, because part of social work is being an advocate. You advocate for your clients, for the best interests of your clients. And I've seen times where I've had to strongly advocate in these courts and in these police precincts, because this person is unstable and they need the services that they need these services, to just be at baseline. And I've seen it where one get preferential treatment than the other. And I mean, again, it speaks to the level of racism that goes on and that's infiltrated within our systems that has been designed and built by white men. And let's just call it the way it is. And so we have a responsibility to address and to name these sorts of disparities, for the sake of being able to help these people, to help our Black and brown people. And like I said, I can go on and on and on about it. But one of the other things that I will say is that courts now have what they call a mental health component. They have mental health court, which means that if a particular client who is mentally ill, white, black, whatever your racial or ethnic backgrounds are, if you have a mental health illness, and they know, and you can prove it, and you have documentations to prove that you have mental health, your case is not heard in the regular mainstream court. Is held those court cases are heard in mental health court, because we have to deal with you and treat you differently because you have a mental health diagnosis, and especially one that is severe.
Just one thing I would quickly like to add is that I, especially as a primary care provider, I look at mental health as a chronic disease. And oftentimes what I find is that my patients will say like, oh, I got bipolar, I took one medication and that's it, or, it worked or it didn't work. And I tell people, if you have diabetes, we don't give you one medication and say it works. And if it didn't work, that's it. Or if you need a second medication for your blood pressure, that doesn't mean you're a failure. But that these things do need to be adjusted with time. And as you change and as your body changes, your presentation or your outcome will look different as well too. And it's important for me that when you have a mental illness, just like when you have diabetes and you tell your family members, I can't have macaroni and cheese tonight, or I can't have cornbread today because I get blood sugar. Also telling your family that, I have anxiety or I have depression, and allowing others to work with you as well too really builds the confidence in yourself and allows you to be the best you that you can and get your disease under control. No different than blood pressure, no different than diabetes.
That's very good. From the comment section, Dr. Johnson said, I love the idea of handing your provider a list of questions or concerns. I think that was a really great takeaway for everyone here. And the question comes, how do Black counselors, doctors, healthcare providers, how do you find support and care for your own mental health, especially given that you're typically working with white clients in white spaces?
Well, I can definitely say that I too have a mental health provider. I feel like you cannot do this work and its effectiveness if you don't have someone that you can go and get your buckets filled. I fill everyone's buckets from 8 to 4, and sometimes before and after 8 o'clock and 4 o'clock, respectfully. And at the same time, too, I feel like there is a responsibility that I make sure that my buckets are filled so that I can effectively fill someone else's bucket to be able to do the things that they need to do in their life. And I think above everything else, I'm a man of faith. I pray. I have a prayer life, and it's very critical. It is very important to have that. I have people that I have accountability people, accountability places and spaces that I can go to talk with people, to be free, to just express whatever it is that I'm going on, but also for them to fill me up as well. I have a wonderful wife, thank God, and she's also incredible too, and all of that. So I exercise, I eat healthy, all those things are very important to be able to have like the stability that you need in order to do this work. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the same things. I also have a therapist, and I I advocate strongly for all mental health providers to do that. I honestly think it's good practice, and I think that it's essential to understand the patient experience and to be able to empathize with their experience. So I think it's good practice. I if it were up to me, it would be mandated. But yeah, a lot of things Walter said as well. I exercise. I try to make time to spend with my friends and rejuvenate. One of the in the title of the event, boundaries. I try to turn off after the day and really between each session. When I'm seeing, I actually don't work primarily with white patients, but I do have some. So I'll defer to somebody else for that piece of it. But from each client, um, I I've had to learn to set a boundary so I can be fully present for the next person, um, no matter what the level of intensity is, and with that particular client. I try to do the same. I try not to take my clients home with me. um, it's it's fair. It's not fair for me, and it's not fair for them if I do that. So um, yeah, I just want to name that piece. But exercise is great. I get energy from working with the young people I work with, outside of my clinical work. So, and then I have my wonderful frat brothers who I talk to, and my buddies and all of that good stuff.
Dr. Johnson, do doctors have doctors?
Of course. In addition to what they said about having things like therapists and having things like psychiatrists, they're also um, kind of piggybacking off of what Brother Dan said. You also have to be in tune with yourself at times. And if you can recognize that your anxiety is building for whatever reason, or you can recognize that you are angry for no reason, knowing little small triggers for yourself and knowing how to take 5 minutes and bring yourself down, or what kind of calming techniques work for you. I have some patients who use coloring books. I have some who use breathing techniques, some who use apps on their phone. But yes, having some insight into that is important. But yes, doctors have doctors, doctors have mental health providers, doctors have, specialists, whatever it needs to be. But one must take care of themselves no matter who you are.
I
I
completely.
like to I like to label it as, we all, some of us and most of us, I assume, have been on plane rides, and one of the things that the captain would say is, secure the mask on yourself first, and when you have time, and if you have time, and if the person beside you needs that mask to be put on them, like put it on that particular person. And I always use that analogy amongst my clients, like you can't help someone be their best selves if you're not your best self. So make sure that you secure the mask on you first before you try to secure it on someone else.
Someone asked a question: am I passing on emotional and mental health challenges to my kids? I don't know anything other than what I know. I don't know how to teach healthy coping skills in the heat of the situation. Am I passing it on to my kids? Is this hereditary?
So what you said is a very good point. Are you passing on these bad things to your children? I also want to add on, you can pass on healthy things too by even coming back 10 minutes later and saying, what I did was wrong, or how did what I did make you feel? And that is something that you can teach your children, which is just as well. And maybe the next generation will learn that much faster to say, before I answer like this, let me take a minute and think. So don't think it's only about what happens at the heat of the moment, but children see you 24/7, 365. Think about what you're showing them at all times.
Is what you said, Dr. Brother Johnson, and that is modeling the behavior, modeling the attitudes that you will like to see be incorporated, like moving forward. If your child does not know that it is safe for them to be able to come to you because that has not been modeled, then they won't feel that way. And so again, it is a very valid thought, is a very valid concern. I just want to name that as well. Like it is very valid, and especially in some of the Black and brown homes that I have worked in, like that has been like the very sentiment, because the way they have been taught and the way they've been taught and told how to deal with mental health and feelings and all that stuff is totally unlike what we are seeing and what we're ascribing to right now today in our practices. And it does require a lot of reframing of your mindset of these things, to not do things that have been done to you and what you've learned. But it also begins with a willingness and an openness to want to make these changes. And that's the first step. If you acknowledge it and there's a willingness to do that, then you won't see these patterns moving forward, if you're very proactive to do the work.
So the other part of that question was, is it heritable? And there are genetic components to a lot of mental illnesses. Um, we talk about the biopsychosocial model. So there can be biological components, psychological components, and social or environmental components to mental illness, and then another piece is intergenerational trauma. We can pass down our stress and trauma to our kids. And I think for the person who asked the question, even the fact that they're asking themselves the question demonstrates a level of self-awareness that is incredibly important. It means you're doing the right thing just to be thinking about these things. And parents don't always, I mean, naming that you don't always do things right is the first step. Being honest with your kids about that. Brother Johnson said, going back and saying that, you know, I was wrong here, or maybe even just talking about it, talking about your perspective. Maybe he felt you were partially wrong, and having that conversation, opening that door after the fact with your young people. And also, the next step is going to therapy with your kids. Family therapy is an amazing experience and very powerful modeling and work.
That's called new school parenting. Just so everybody knows that, because old school parenting, first of all, there were no questions asked about how I did anything. If you got a whooping and you didn't do it, well, you deserve that whooping for something you did and I didn't catch you. But
As my
something
father is on the call, I'm going to not answer that one at all. I'm just going to stay away from that completely.
Understood, Dr. Johnson. But to the person who asked that question, I think it's important what the other brother Dan said earlier is to realize that Black men are not beasts. We are not monsters. We are intelligent human beings with hearts, with emotions. We are complex. We are not even monolithic on this call. And so I commend you certainly for asking that question, for showing some heart. And I think that your children are going to be much better off for it. I do have another question. I realize that our time has gotten away from us, and the questions are great. And I thank you for your participation, everyone, tonight. The question is with a little narrative. It says, I went to a therapist who told me she couldn't help me after she charged me for a session where I poured out my heart and gave her a full history in the context of my situation. Is there a difference in qualifications of therapists? How do I know that I've chosen the right one for my problems? I'm just trying to get healing.
Before you answer that question, I just want to make a quick statement. I know that our time is short, but this is such a great discussion. If our panel is able to stay a little longer, please stay. If you can't, you can't. But I'm not going to end this call or this discussion because of time. It's a very important discussion about our mental health. So if we keep it going, we'll do our best. And I know we'll have more questions. So go right ahead, brothers.
I'm sorry to the person who asked that question for that unfortunate experience. My question back would be, did they hopefully they provided a referral. It is good ethical practice to know the limits of what you can and can't do. And yes, there are different folks have different specialties. And ideally, you'll have folks like if somebody comes to my office asking for medication, I can't do that. I can't help them with that. If someone comes to my office and they're asking for I may know, I can't think of something off the top of the head that I don't do clinically. Oh, like a movement therapist or a dance therapist and things of that nature, more specialized care that I don't do. I'm not going to front and try to try to fake it. That's bad practice. So there are different credentials and different specialties. Psychologists do testing and an assessment, and that's something that's unique to the psychology field. So yeah, I'll let other brothers jump in.
I think
I think we've lost you again. Whatever you did to fix that, Brother Higgs, last time, do that one more time.
I would jump in as a positive. Yeah, even to try to spin it into a good light. If you come to a provider and they tell you that they cannot help you, at least they're not stringing you along and taking your money and not going to be of a service to you. At least they've freed you to a certain extent to find someone who can. If you come to me as a primary care provider and you're having a heart attack, there's certain things I can do for you, but there's certain things I cannot do for you. But trying to get you into the right place is the most important thing. But if I allow you to believe that I can help you, I would really be doing you a disservice.
Right.
Can you all hear me now? I'm so sorry.
That's
We
just
can, bro.
fine, brother. We can hear you.
Brother
Okay.
Brother Higgs, right before you jump in, I just wanted to shout out Madison Thompson. We should shop harder for our therapists than we do our suits. That's I like that. I like that
agree.
line.
I definitely.
There we go. One more time. Fix that again. Fix that again, my friend. Your microphone is just abusing you tonight.
You all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm so sorry that that person had to go through this. In short, you have a client, not a client, excuse me, a therapist. Definitely, if they're not experted in the fields like, dealing with trauma, like being trauma informed, or these other modalities like, CBT, which is cognitive behavior therapy, or dialectical behavior therapy, or, the sensory, like all these other modalities, clinical modalities that is required to help treat you. Yes, I will hope that their best practices will say to do a referral. And that is what you do first and foremost. That clinician have an ethical and legal responsibility to refer you to the right people so that you can get the help and assistance that you need. And it is okay. Can you all hear me still?
Yes.
And it is okay for a therapist to do that, to say that. The other thing that I want to plug in is Psychology Today. It is a website that have a list of all therapists, whether from all race backgrounds and everything, pictures and all, some don't. They have information if you put into what you're looking for, like you have a specificity with regards to the type of doctor you want, or the type of dentist you want. Therapists are the same, like the way you shop for a therapist is the same exact way that you do for any of the other things that I've named. So logging in, definitely, like, I want a Black female therapist who specializes in trauma-informed therapy. You type that into Psychology Today in that website, and it pops up everybody that is specialized in that. I think the other piece that we need to talk about is comparability of insurances, because all therapists do not take the types of insurances that you might have. So it's also very important to understand and know the types of insurance, because it could be I'm there, but the particular therapists do not take the type of insurance that you have. So that is also very, very key as well. So take those things in mind.
So what I'm hearing is another layer, another barrier, perhaps another boundary, a hoop that you got to jump through. I'll also, since you put out Psychology Today, InnoPsych, INNOPSYCH.com, InnoPsych.com. Someone put it in the comment section earlier. Dr. Charmaine Jackson, who is a Black woman and a psychologist, has put together this database of mental health providers of color, Black folks, male and female, right here in Massachusetts and the surrounding area, where you just need to go ahead and find. Brother Dan's already put that up there. Dr. Charmaine Jackson, PhD, Black psychologist in Boston. She has done the work for you. All you need to do is find your therapist, and that's for Black men who usually want to talk to somebody else who looks like us and understands our cultural context. Well, listen, at this time, I want to open it up. There are some people who've had some pressing questions. And in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 minutes, let's get some audience participation outside of the chat. If you're brave enough and you want to, and you have a question that will add to this discussion, we want to hear from you. So feel free.
Brother Green.
Yes, Brother Pamphile.
Just want to ask my question real quick to our panelists. We have a pandemic that has been going on since February of 2020. What is your opinion of how that pandemic has affected our African-American Black men's psychology or mental health? And, you know, for example, job searching, losing a job, homes, not being able to pay rents or pay mortgages or pay bills. What is your opinion on that? And then we can open up to the rest of the folks here with us.
You know, a comedian would say Black people are used to being broke, and a comedian would say it doesn't really make a difference. But that is not really the truth at all. What it has done, it has really pushed the boundaries, particularly on Black men who want to be or have this traditional feeling that they must be provider and must provide for the family and must do the quote unquote breadwinning and must be the strongest person in the family. It has really pushed these boundaries, and hopefully it has allowed Black men in particular to understand that you know, what's the expression? Teamwork makes the dream work. Knowing that you can work with other people to reach your best and better self, not only for you, but also for your family.
Hello, my name is Orlando Lightfoot, and I know a whole bunch of you on this call. So good to see you. Kwame, Tommy Johnson, Terrell Johnson, Mark Lockett, and all you guys that I know from Brother Higgs, all of you I know from one way or another in my time in Boston. I'm so thankful to be able to participate with you by Zoom today. I'm a practitioner, part of the old school group, and I want to say that you're bringing up all the kinds of questions that we've continued to look at over the years. Nothing's new here. We're back to Ecclesiastes. There's nothing new under the sun. And so we're bringing it right back to where it needs to be. I would say that one of the first things that keep Black men, Black folks, white folks, orange persons from going to counselors is they're worried that they're crazy. And that's the thing that throws everybody in cahoots. Am I crazy? Well, I tell people right away, well, I understand your concern because I had it myself. I was a patient long before I became a physician, and certainly before I became a psychiatrist. So I know from crazy. I was sitting there wondering about what's going on with me. And I recognize over these many 50 odd years that I've practiced that it is common concern and has to be dealt with up front so you can talk about all the issues that the rest of you have talked about here in terms of what other issues, what trauma may be coming up, what substance abuse issue may be confronting you, what family concern may be on your mind, what experience have you had that has made you less comfortable? You know, how have you been impacted by all these things? But you got to get that first one out of the way, give them some comfort, much like Kwame said, what brings you here today? And a lot of people can get to it, and sometimes they can't. But if you can bring out some parts of yourself that normalize it, that you, as Brother Higgs said before, he talks to his therapist. And when he gets some stuff, you know, worked out, it feels comfortable. Yes, we're all seeking that part of some sense of normality, and you will continue to seek as you proceed. Keep doing it, brothers. I'll shut up now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Lightfoot.
It's awesome seeing you, Dr. Lightfoot. Yeah, I love that you brought up, you know, we talked about boundaries earlier. Disclosure is another thing. Some people are more comfortable than others disclosing their process and their journey. I tend to think, I use disclosure in therapy. I disclose that I see a therapist. I'll disclose that I was a client before practicing when it's appropriate. what I always think about when I'm using disclosure is this for me or is this for my client? And if it is for me, then I do it. If I feel that it will help this person to feel more comfortable in the space and disclosing and feel that they have a shared identity, then I think that can be very beneficial. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with Brother Dance. I sometimes, when it's appropriate, when it's clinically appropriate, definitely use disclosure. What I've also found as a result of that, I feel like I have seen therapeutic relationships getting even stronger and tighter, and just the free flow and the ability for a client to be able to share more and trust a little bit more because, hey, they see someone face to face that have experiences. So I'm not really alone in all of that. And most clients like really need to hear that, especially when they have a lot of skepticism, coming into this journey of therapy and counseling and psychology and all. So I definitely agree.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Terrence Johnson. And one of the questions that I have is, as far as politics are concerned, a topic that's on everyone's mind is universal health care. And mental health, at least from my perspective, isn't always a part of that conversation. And so how are you seeing, mental health in the arena of universal health care? And how do you see that, adequately servicing, the entire nation if that choice is made?
So I work in community mental health primarily. I work in a couple of different settings, but the way I feel it as a provider is the push for a quick and hopefully accurate diagnosis to justify treatment, which is guided by affordable care and universal health care. Very important because we're able to get folks access that didn't have it before, but that push for that kind of rapid treatment that's strictly based on the evidence can be one. It doesn't feel great all the time for a clinician. Relationships take time, and I feel that one of the gaps in universal healthcare as it relates to mental health is we're not medical. Well, it's not the same as a medical provider where you go in for a 15-minute visit once every 6 months or whatever it is, and you get a fix, a medical fix. It's not like that. So I feel like it doesn't take that piece into consideration, but we need to be held to a standard. We need to be you can't just sit in therapy forever and not get anywhere either. So, because that's just racking up costs. So I understand the purpose for it. And I think that there's a balance for that push. And it's definitely a need. We need to get everybody help.
Thank you. We might be able to take maybe 2 more questions if there are some questions in the participants. I'm looking through the comments section here.
Yeah, my bad. Can I say something real quick? I'm in the store, but I'll say something real fast. First, thank you to everybody for just this tonight. This is pretty dope. My question is, I work in education, and I also been working as a mental health worker for a number of years, and in part because of my personal experiences and my experience as a mental health worker, my approach as an educator, I find has been more effective because I'm looking at kids not just looking to support them academically, but also providing them social emotional learning. I see that it continues to be a struggle in education as a whole because you have teachers, you have many educators in the field who don't necessarily come from the backgrounds don't necessarily share the same background as many of the students that they serve. I think my question is, how would you how would you approach peers, or how would you approach fellow educators, or are there materials that you think that should be provided, for different districts on how to better support kids, better support kids from a social emotional lens, especially with so many kids coming in, having faced varying levels of trauma.
I'm going to defer to my other two brothers here. I don't, in my practice, I deal with adults 18 and up. I'm going to step back a little bit and listen and learn as well, too, because I would like to know from my own personal knowledge bank, because I think what you asked is an excellent question, actually.
I just want to say that I've had that experience where, I had to confront not only a teacher, but also the principal at a particular school. And it was an alternative school. It was a school designed to have a close knit environment for mentally ill and behaviorally challenged students. And unfortunately, the stereotype, white teacher, Black little boy, the automatic go-to was, oh, just get him Ritalin because he's just such a monster in my classroom, and he's constantly disruptive, and he's constantly disturbing, the other classmates, and not taking the time to understand this young man's biopsychosocial background, and the notion that the reason why he was running around was simply because he felt unsafe in the classroom. This man lived, this 8-year-old little boy lived in some of the most averse areas of Boston, where he was confronted a lot with the violence, the gun violence that was going on. So much so that even I witnessed his father get shot in front of him. And so this gentleman, this little boy, felt unsafe. He felt unsafe. The reason why little Johnny couldn't sit down in his seat to be engaged in the learning environment was not because he just wanted to be controlling in the classroom and wanted to take over the class. He felt unsafe. He felt that, if he sat down, something was going to happen. She didn't take the time to get to understand this particular client before they was just advocating, oh, put him on Ritalin. No, I shut that down immediately as a social worker who knows the essence of doing their research and doing the biopsychosocial backgrounds on these students, And so because of that, we were able to get him the treatment that he needed. And needless to say, he was able to engage in a class and not be disrupted in class. But it takes people like myself who see these things and not afraid to address it and address colleagues about it, definitely in a professional and respectful way, of course, but being able to hold providers, teachers, principals accountable, that while they're on your watch, you have a responsibility, you're accountable for their environment and making sure that that's safe first and foremost. So I will say that I would definitely say advocacy is very important, and having people to advocate for these students who are having these sorts of challenges in a classroom setting.
Real quick,
Can I make a point too? Henry McMillan, good evening, brothers. Glad to have you. There's also issues such as other conditions, such as atopic dermatitis, which will make a child very itchy in class, and people don't know all about those issues. And then having those things, and particularly in the African American community, we have a higher prevalence of that than some of our other colleagues. And so, just to mention what Walter said, you have to really investigate very clearly what the situation is and what other underlying conditions may be part of the situation.
Sure. Really quickly, let me just add, I just want to say all of that absolutely. Also, teach the families to use what their resources are. They can request evaluation for an IEP, an individualized education plan, or a 504 plan. So there are things in place for resources as well.
This will make another comment real quick. Being a Blue Cross Blue Shield person, depending on your insurance, you can also go to your payer and see if they have mental health clinical specialists, case managers, those areas as well. I can't speak for all the plans, but you do your research when you're doing your annual enrollment to find out if those things are also covered, or they're covered at a lower fee as part of your insurance that you have. So always take that into consideration as well.
Oh, brothers, I'd like to ask for a personal comment based on all the intelligent conversation. I'm coming from a non-technical perspective. What was underlying a lot of what I heard is about us being honest with ourselves, speaking up, and referrals. And I'll share this with you. I got referred, my insurance was not accepted by my PCP, a very attentive doctor. And so they assigned me, the insurance assigned me to a new PCP. Didn't know him, never visited, we met. Within a few months of being there, he observed, this is a white male, I'm a black man. He observed that I had not had any therapy in 9 years of bereavement, and referred me to one of his colleagues. Fast forward, his colleague and I, another white male, who had also gone through bereavement, we became almost friends and brothers. We had contrasting backgrounds. He is like, I am black, he is white, but we both live in the same town, but we found a number of common things. Also, to learn, and he shared with me as we were discussing, and I was opening up, and we were having conversations about what is troubling me and what are the challenges I have, and how come I don't have a new consistent relationship when I was seeking that. Only to learn also that he had gone through some of that, and that he too, as we are now talking about, both of us have now gone into relationships. He is now married from going online. So I share all of that in that it was the opening up, was the conversation, talking as two mature men with accomplished backgrounds. We had so much in common, but we would not have known it if we had met in the supermarket. But the referral process based on who was observing me, who knew of his profession, and I share that because I think one of the challenges we have had, and this comes culturally, you're hearing an accent, I'm a Caribbean man and so on, the things we have held back on mental health and behavioral health and the problems it has caused, we need to encourage both those of us who are our peers. I am now very concerned about the younger men. Let's keep talking to them as we guide them and say, talk up, talk to your mother, talk to your uncle, whomever you trust, and get some guidance. So I just wanted to share that because I am so grateful for this opportunity to have been with you. Thank you.
Thank you. We're grateful for you and for your sharing this evening. Certainly want to keep an eye on the time this evening. Brother Pamphile said that we won't shut it down if there are more questions. So I'll give a last call for questions before we come to our conclusion this evening.
Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Pierre Lucien. Thank you so much for this rich and informative discussion on this critically important topic. I do have one question. Are there strategies to encourage family and friends to seek mental health services? More specifically, think about like a Black father or a Black uncle who's from a different school of thought, but from my perception may need mental health services.
Short answer is we don't have any good ones yet, and if we did, we wouldn't be pausing so long before we answered. I'm very serious though. It is difficult to try to convince family members, no matter what it is, whether it's just to convince a Black man, white woman, just to see a doctor for an annual visit or to see someone about your mood. It can be difficult, and really the best advocate is the family, is the person who knows them best, and trying to find a way to say, like, this is what you care about, and sometimes trying to help them understand that your outward display can affect me. And maybe if there's that connection there between you and the family member, that can be that key that brings them in. But it is difficult. And that's why we all hesitate to answer.
Yeah. One thing that I've done is shared my experience, and I've advised people to check out therapy yourself. And then say, this really benefited me if it did. So lead by example.
I think to add to that, I've usually have done something to the nature of, it's been brought to our attention or my attention that this may be something or an area that, there have been some struggles with it. And I think trying to put it in a way that it's okay, it's okay that these things are coming up, and not looking at them from a place of judgment and everything. I think it's all in presentation and how you deliver that, which will determine the buy-in to move forward and engaging in further services. And so what I have usually done is I've had clients that I have run into clients who've had similar situations with like you, and was also very reluctant, just like you, really normalizing it in a way that, yeah, you're not the only one, sort of a thing. And, it's been my experience that this particular service have worked for many, and this particular service, and just naming the different things that have worked from people from my experience, or working with other clients who are their peers, not disclosing names or anything like that. And just leave the onus on them, empower them, leave the onus to them. And what
Since volume went out, I want to add in one other thing, is that if it's important to you, don't give up, right? You don't ask someone to stop smoking once, and because they don't stop smoking, they give up. If it's important to you, keep at it, and it will show that it is important to that person as well too. That is one thing that I've definitely found to help.
As Brother Green alluded to, I did want to continue the conversation because we had so many great questions and the conversation was so great. If we did have one last question, I'll prevent that one last question to go through. But if not, we can conclude from there. And anybody, do you have one last question for our panelists before we let them go?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Farouk Sahabin. I want to thank you all for this incredible conversation here tonight. My question is, in and around and with respect to the criminal legal system. So I know there's evidence that, supports that mental health screening tools used by jails, reproduce racial disparities, as well as evidence to support that, prosecutors are more likely to grant pretrial diversion to white defendants rather than to Black or brown defendants. So my question is there any responses to that? Are there any solutions that you would pitch out there? Thank you.
Jump in on that one. I currently work at Bridgewater State Hospital. That's one of my rotations, which is a prison hospital, essentially. So you have a lot of people that are awaiting incompetency to stand trial and not guilty by reason of insanity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we that's what the forensic team does. We do the testing, and all of the tests that we use were normed on not normed on Black and brown folks. They're very culturally loaded. It, as a field, what there's a push to do. One is to get more clinicians of color out there, because you do have the clinical interview portion in which you're assessing what's not caught in the exam and those other explanations for things like Brother Hicks was talking about earlier. So diversifying the field is one way, but also I know the American Psychological Association, for better or worse, is enforces we have, as part of our curriculum, we have to have a diversity course and courses, which we're trying to beef up, but cultural awareness and understanding the fact that those factors and our biases, both implicit and explicit from those tests, is incredibly important for effective evaluation. If I were a lawyer, I would very much so scrutinize the tests themselves and ask the questions that they don't ask.
I say ditto to what Brother Dance is saying. Some of the same experiences that he has encountered with his clients at Bridgewater State, I've definitely have encountered those things working with clients who are mentally ill and get like charges, Corey cases and open cases from Boston Municipal Court to Roxbury to Dorchester to Lynn District to Salem District, and I think the bottom line is about advocacy. Like, who is on your team? Who is on that particular client's team to advocate these things? I'm one who has been trained to look at the whole picture, and I will argue that, and that also is inclusive of understanding culture dynamics and norms, and pushing that and really advocating again for those services and these screenings to be evaluated for these particular clients for their safety, because it's our job. Like, we don't want to see anyone in jail. At least I don't as a provider. So let's do the things that we need to do. Let's be proactive as providers to provide these services and going above and beyond for these clients who need these services.
Thank you, brother, so much. So before we conclude this evening, I want to give our panelists an opportunity to have the final word. So I'm going to give you each 1 minute to just shout out your organizations, perhaps some resources, whatever is on your heart. You have 1 minute, and we're going to start with Dr. Terrell Johnson.
So again, sorry, I was on mute. Thank you for having me. And it was a pleasure for this conversation to hear the questions. It's always important. One of the things that I like to tell people is this: you have the right to shop around for a doctor. Someone earlier in the chat said their insurance gave them a doctor. No, they just pick a name out of a hat. You have the right to ask physicians things like, what are your hours? Will you call me about results? Will your nurse call me about results? Are you working on Saturdays? Do you work late at night? Do you feel comfortable with me if I have a history of anxiety and depression? Or, do you have resources here at your hospital? Don't be afraid to shop and ask those questions. Your visit doesn't always have to be strictly about my blood pressure. It's okay to ask these other questions and be an educated consumer, just like you would for anything else. You don't walk into Best Buy and just buy the first TV you see. You ask a few questions. Do the same thing about your providers.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Then we'll go to Brother Higgs.
To echo, I definitely echo what Brother Johnson have said. I think the thing that I want to leave off with the fact is this: we have to look at systems and we have to challenge systems in order to get the things and the services that we need in order to get and have the basic quality of life that we deserve. It is your right. It is your God-given right to advocate for these services. Our taxpayer dollars pay for these services for you to engage them, and you will be doing yourself a disservice if you do not tap into these resources that is available. There's Google. You can Google these things. Like we have access to technology that has these information, as well as our providers that we go to if we're engaging with them. Like, do not be afraid to ask these questions. Also, again, understanding that systems shape a lot of the things that we're talking about, whether it's medical services, behavioral health services, systems affect these things. And the last thing that I will say is, if you have not voted already, it is important, like now more than ever, that you vote and you make your vote count. Because if you do not vote, things like Affordable Care Act, things like being able to have these little resources that we need just to sustain themselves, they will be
Oh, you got to be kidding me. That was the closing word right there. Spoken like a true alpha. And brother Dance, brother future Dr. Dance, would you please, with your final word?
No doubt. I wish that that voting piece was the last word. So Brother Higgs, thank you for saying that. A couple things. One, we need to keep having these conversations. In terms of challenging the systems, one of the big issues that I'm trying to challenge in my work is diversifying the field of mental health providers. And to do so, we need to talk to our kids as young as possible about mental health, mental illness, and mental health professions and treatment, and make it normalize that. And it starts with you. We'll leave with a couple of quick resources. One, again, to echo innopsych.com, that came out for referrals to clinicians of color. My program, the Mental Health Access program, which can be found at thementalhealthaccess.org. It's a career development mental health professional exposure program for Black teens. I'd also like to shout out CMTP, the Center for Multicultural Training in Psychology in Whittier Street Health Center, and the Black Graduate Mental Health Academy at William James College. I saw Dr. Natalie Court on here, but it's for a support group for psychology doctoral students and master's students.
And Brother Green, I also want to shout out, because I was having difficulties over here. Real quickly, I want to shout out www.therapyforblackmen.org is also a wonderful resource for Black men, exclusively for Black men.
Excellent. Thank you. And I do believe that I saw some of those resources in our chat and comment section. So please avail yourself before you log off from tonight's Zoom call. Make certain that you scroll up and get those web addresses just once again. So I have to say thank you to this amazing panel. On behalf of the brothers of Epsilon Gamma Lambda, chapter of Alpha Alpha, and our chapter president, Brother Franz Pamphile, thank you for participating tonight in Walls, Bridges, and Boundaries, discussion on Black men's mental health. And I cannot end tonight without shouting out my beautiful wife, Conchetta Green, and my family. It's quiet here because my wife has got things under control. So thank you again to expert panelists, Brother Johnston, Brother Higgs, Brother Dance, for all of your answers to these thought-provoking questions tonight. You know, resiliency is what happens at the intersection of mental health and one's experience as a member of the Black diaspora. So my encouragement to you is to share your values. Brothers, share and strengthen your family connections. Find expression through spirituality, through music, and lean on your networks for strength and support. Visit your doctor and find a mental health provider. Be safe, stay healthy, and be well. Brother Pamphile, last word to you.
Absolutely. I saw a couple of brothers who I haven't seen in a long time, Brother Jamie Ferguson, Brother Will Dolphin. I am so happy to see you guys jump on this conversation. You know, you guys mean the world to me, for real. And as Brother Walter Higgs was alluding to, vote, vote, vote. I voted early with my wife, my beautiful wife, Michaela Pamphil, is a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. We went out and voted. We did our thing. Vote early if you can, but again, vote, vote, and vote. Thank you.
Thank you all. Good night. And brothers, 06.
06.
06.
6.
06.